Okay, let's move on to item number 7, please.
Item 7A, adopt an urgency ordinance establishing a temporary moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent by small business commercial tenants directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, we're going to turn this to our city attorney. This is, as you know, at our last meeting, this is where Director Smith and the city attorney Zaffarano went over. We gave our feedback, and I think came up pretty much to a consensus on asking them to bring back this urgency ordinance. City attorney.
Mr. Mayor, just give us a moment while we work out the technical aspects of it, and we'll be right back with you.
Okay, thank you.
Talk to the computer. Talk to mom.
Mark, would it help you if I pulled up your presentation? Okay.
How many hours straight?
Okay, well, I think we've got it, and we're going to give it a try.
It looks good.
Fabulous. We've got the first slide. We're 10% there. All right. So this is a discussion, as Mayor indicated, about the commercial eviction urgency ordinance. And we have a brief agenda with background. We'll just briefly go over the policy rationales and legal basis. We're going to look at the ordinance provisions that we drafted and then next steps. So this is what we displayed last time. So I'm not going to spend any more than a minute on this particular slide. We have shelter-in-place orders and a state order on March 16. March 23rd, the county adopted a moratorium on residential evictions that covered the entire county, including the city of San Bruno. And then on April 7, the county adopted a moratorium on commercial evictions that covered only the unincorporated areas. And then at your last meeting on the 28th, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, you provided direction to staff to draft an ordinance that was similar to those that were being adopted almost universally by other cities on the peninsula. So briefly to review the policy rationales, we've all said it before. The city manager said it, council members have said it. We're in a severe and unprecedented economic time that will hopefully only occur once in our lifetime. There is clearly a public interest in small businesses remaining open, well, because they provide essential services during the pandemic. We've used them all. They're essential for the public health, safety, and welfare. There's also a public interest in other small businesses reopening when that's allowed. And you've already seen some of that possibility of reopening with the state order, although the county orders are still in effect. But eventually that will occur. Not immediately, and those businesses are also essential to the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of our community. City Council also briefly looked at some of the other considerations about whether to adopt this kind of ordinance. There is a more equal bargaining position between commercial landlords and tenants than in the residential setting. The City Council considered that some landlords might qualify as small businesses themselves, so not just tenants, but landlords might be. And then in addition, you heard that the courts are not hearing any eviction cases until 90 days after the shelter-in-place order is lifted by the governor. So the possibility of an actual eviction is relatively low. We did talk briefly about the legal basis for the ordinance. The government code provides you with that authority. It does require factual findings, which we've included in the ordinance. And the courts will generally defer to the City Council's factual findings. Important to note, this does require a 4/5 vote of the City Council, so four affirmative votes are required for the adoption of this ordinance, and if that occurs tonight or at a later date, the ordinance is effective immediately. There's no second reading like there is for other ordinances. Let's take a second and review the ordinance provisions that we included based on the City Council's direction. So the first question was, what should be the floor or the ceiling for annual gross receipts for tenants that would qualify? And what the City Council directed was $5 million. And so that covers over 90% of all of the businesses in San Bruno. So quite a generous, large number of small businesses included in that definition. The ordinance would be effective until the 31st of this month unless extended, and hold that thought, we're going to come back to that at the very end. It would also apply, looking back, to all unexpired notices of eviction. And there was one council member that requested that we look at, can we make this retroactive to, some month and a half or more ago when the shelter-in-place order was first indicated, and we're not recommending that at this time. There is a legal risk in applying this to notices of eviction that have already expired, and applying the ordinance retroactively, I would suggest, is not an appropriate legal risk to take under these circumstances. So we've made it applicable to unexpired notices of eviction. So if you're a commercial tenant and you received a notice of eviction from your landlord, and that notice hasn't expired yet, this ordinance would protect you. Like the other ordinances in the county, this requires landlords to notify tenants of the ordinance itself and to their right to submit documentation for why they can't pay the rent due to a COVID-19 related inability to pay. And that's very similar to the other ordinances in the county. And the city council also requested that we include a provision also similar to ordinances in the county, that the tenant can defer paying rent for up to 90 days initially, but then can request from the landlord 3 additional 30-day periods. So that would bring them to basically the end of November of this year if they requested and received those additional 3 30-day periods. The ordinance, similarly also to other ordinances, prohibits late fees. The city council did request that we include the possibility of granting a hardship waiver for the landlord. So the landlord can make its case to the city manager, whose decision is final, regarding whether there should be a hardship waiver or not for that particular landlord. The city council also requested that we make it clear that enforcement would be by the private parties and not the city. And then finally, getting back to that expiration date, May 31st doesn't seem like that long from now, and somebody might ask, why don't we make it extend longer than that? And the answer to that is that the state order issued by the governor only authorizes cities to do this until the 31st. And so it's possible that that order will be extended, and if it is, the city council can similarly extend this ordinance. Let's say the governor decides to extend that authority to all the cities in California to adopt these kinds of ordinances. Then we would plan to come back to you on June 2nd at the special city council meeting that's already scheduled for another matter to bring this back for a further extension. And that only results in having to look back a day or two for any gap, so that's not a problem. So that's the reason why it's only valid until the 31st of this month. So what are the next steps? If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I request that if there's any members of the public who wish to comment, that they be allowed to do so, have some city council discussion, and then if the city council desires, they can adopt the ordinance by a 4/5 vote. So that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, City Attorney. I'm going to see and ask the City Clerk, do we have anybody from the public who wishes to speak on this item? City
I don't
Clerk?
see hands either.
I don't see any hands raised, no.
Okay, so then we'll end with the public participation, and let's bring it to council. As we said, we're familiar with this. I know we gave clear direction to staff, but questions, comments from council.
Through the chair.
Michael.
So just a couple of things. So we will require landlords to notify their tenants of this, and so then I imagine the city will initially take the action of notifying the landlords once this is passed. And so do we have a list of all of those landlords that would fall within this particular ordinance and have a way of reaching out to them, and what is that communication plan?
If I may, through the chair, that's a question. So the city does not necessarily have a list of all landlords. We know who some of the major landlords in the cities are, but we sort our information about business licenses, whether people say they're a landlord or not. They could be in their own business and we wouldn't know that. So normally what we would do is reach out to the major property owners in the city and also to the groups, the interest groups that do represent landlords, and notify them. I'm sure they're following this throughout California, if not just in San Bruno and on the peninsula, and it likely will not come as any surprise that the city of San Bruno, along with almost every other city on the peninsula, is adopting this kind of ordinance.
Okay. And then in terms of the hardship waiver, so the city manager will be tasked with passing judgment on whether people qualify for that waiver, and if the waiver is granted, then that means that that particular landlord will be allowed to evict his tenants?
Not necessarily. They would only be allowed to serve the tenant with a notice of eviction. But as I indicated before, the courts are in essence closed for any of those proceedings for really the foreseeable future. And so those matters would not be proceeding in court.
Okay. All right. And also, will there be a way for us to collect data on how many tenants are taking advantage of this, or you know, and the reason I'm interested in that is because if we have to extend this at some point down the road, it would be good for us to know, you know, if we are helping a large number of the small businesses, or if this is largely an empty gesture. And so if there is some way for us to track that between now and the time that we would have to look at an extension of it, it would be, I think, valuable data to have. I just don't know if there's a way for us to track it.
Yeah, I'll refer to either the city manager or the community development director on that. The ordinance doesn't require a tenant to notify the city if they're requesting one, or what happened, or how it all turned out. So there's really no clear way other than anecdotally to obtain that information at this time. But certainly staff can, you know, we know where the small businesses are, or many of them are, and staff can certainly keep their eyes and ears open about it as time progresses to see if there is any communication between those tenants and the city.
Okay. Would we get notification if a business did close?
That's a good question. Not necessarily. Certainly not a small business. I mean, in some circumstances, we might get notified if there's a bankruptcy, say, and if they happen to have a sewer or water bill. So, but just when a business goes out of business, unless they're a certain size or they lay off a certain number of employees and are subject to state law for that, we wouldn't necessarily know that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark.
Other questions from colleagues?
This is Linda.
Linda, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for doing the research and getting this together. I fully support this moving forward. And it's timely because today we got a notification from the county informing everybody of the first group of recipients of the SMC Strong funds, or the grants that came out. And a lot of cities have gotten, honestly, more money because they've put more money in. And just looking at the list, San Bruno, it looks like 3 of our businesses received $10,000 grants: One Hour Dry Cleaning, Raphael Family Inc., and VNR LLC. So compared to the number that we were given at the last meeting, which was, I believe, over 200 small businesses, and only 3 have been impacted so far, I think that every little bit helps. And with that said, since we last met, the San Bruno Community Foundation has also made quite a large contribution. I believe it's $150,000 that are going to go to small businesses, but that's still approximately 15 businesses. So I think every little bit helps. And thank you for getting this together, and I fully support this.
Any other comments from colleagues? Okay, this is an action item. This is, again, as you know, it's a urgency ordinance. So it does require 4 affirmative votes. And again, for staff, I appreciate, I know council brought this to you and you did the homework and you brought it back, pulled together our data. I also appreciate all my colleagues who kind of came together, gave clear direction and came to this, and we have to move forward. So thank you to all of you as well. With that, we would need somebody to have a motion to adopt the ordinance. We need a motion and a second.
Motion to approve.
Is there a motion and a second to approve the urgency ordinance? Is there a roll call? Yes, there has to be a roll call. Melissa.
Councilmember Davis. One more time, Councilmember Davis, you are muted.
Oh, aye.
Councilmember Mason.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. And thank you again to all.